Welcome everybody to the Corporate Services Committee meeting of the 21st of July 2023. I'll declare this meeting open at 9 a.m. and to begin with, we might do the acknowledgement of country, which is not something we've done in the past, but we'll do this. I would like to show respect and acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the land of elders, past, present and future, in which this meeting takes place. Next on, do we have any applications for attending via video link, please, gentlemen?
There's nil applications video link.
And apologies.
Yes, we have one apology from Councillor Flaherty, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And any disclosure of interest today?
I just need to move the acceptance of the apology.
Yeah, well, yes, can I have a mover? Thank you, Mr. Burns. Seconded, Councillor Mackenzie. All those in favour? Everybody, thank you. Disclosures of interest, please.
None have been received yet.
And is there any public participation today?
There's nil public participation.
At everything being in order there, we'll move through to our business items for today. If we could please move on there, Mr. Phelps. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we'll just quickly go through the first report, which is Corp 07.1, just our financial summary and investment report. So on page 3 there, in our financial information summary, as indicated, we have a positive variance to budget at the end of May of $1.2 million compared to about 400,000 reported in April 23. So as the next paragraph indicates, the process of finalising year end is currently underway with a number of revenue and expenditure accruals being processed. So coming up into the June period. Included in the budget variations, there's some deferrals of capital projects in this report and variation pretty well to reflect variations for the new Depop 23-24 year. Just going through as a high level review of the main variations in the $1.2 million to the end of May. In our revenue side of things, we're well in front of our budget at this point in time, and there's a number of contributing factors to that. About $4 million in front of budget, which is about 7%. The first factor is our youth services grants are higher by about 530,000. So we received our initial milestone payment for the Murrundi Youth Facility upgrade. So that came in earlier than anticipated. Our landfill collection revenue is up by nearly $300,000, which has been the increase in our disposal at our landfill sites. You'll see an offsetting increase in our expenditure as well, just in regards to levy increases. Our general purpose revenue is higher by about $400,000, which has been additional funding that we received through the financial assistance grants and also our lower pensioner concessions. Hunter Warbirds and Aerodrome revenue is lower by about nearly $200,000, lower than expected Shire and non-Shire user fees, and then also lower attendance at our Hunter Warbirds facility. Our airport grant is higher by about $106,000, reflecting an initial milestone for the new hangar restoration out at the wall to be done in the 23-24 year. So we've received our initial milestone payment for that, which will be put away into an RA. Footpaths and cycleways revenue is lower than budget by about $400,000. Pretty well it's sitting with the state government in regards to waiting on grant funding to arrive. It's relating to the project over at Merriwar, the extension that we have over there. So there's been a bit of a delay in our completion of that project. However, we'll have an accrual coming through in June to cover off the revenue streams into the mix against the project itself. Transport for New South Wales state contract is higher by about $600,000, We continue to receive increased work orders coming through. So that's been good for council coming through, and also for the staff over at Merriwell, which has been a pleasure. Moving into our regional grants and grant funding, higher by about $700,000. Just additional funding allocation from our Roads to Recoveries and for the Beltrees Hill project. Local roads grant funding is higher by about $600,000, reflecting the receipt of our first milestone payment for Hunter Road, which will be undertaken in the 23-24 year. Obviously, those funds will be put away into a restricted asset for bringing in to undertake the works next year. Transport auxiliary grants funding is higher by about $270,000. Again, receipt of first milestone payments coming through. So as you can see, there's a little bit of a trend happening with the state government and the federal government providing a lot of milestone payments pre-June coming through, which effectively will be put off into restricted assets when the work hasn't been completed. Sewer contributions, section 64 contributions, are higher by about $360,000, which has been quite good in regards to a number of moving forward with the infrastructure projects. So we've had contributions received from two major developments that are undertaken in Scone at this point in time. And the other side of the sewer is the water. So we received $400,000 extra in our water contributions as well, which has been quite pleasing. Water supply user fees. There's been an increase in consumption by residents and businesses in the last billing period. So obviously with the weather becoming a little bit dry, the usage of the water has taken effect. Into our non-operating revenue and expenditures, about $1.1 million under budget at the moment. Our internal fleet hire charge has been lower by about nearly $900,000. So we've had lower utilisations of council's fleet. Our reliance on third-party contractors has been evident with a lot of our projects at this point in time, but also we have a few staffing issues in regards to operators of the heavy kit machinery, like the dozers and so forth. So we're looking at measures of skilling up our staff that we have at the moment, so they can take on a little bit more higher duties work in the driving the graders and so forth. But also we continue to be in the market for or actual employment of grader and medium plant operators continually throughout the year.
I was just wondering if you could speak to that a little bit. What initiatives are we looking to do to acquire new operators and skill up current operators? And perhaps even a question to the general manager, could you maybe put a sales pitch out there for anybody looking to have a good, consistent job with a good lifestyle and weekends off?
Yeah, happy to take that on board, Mr. Chair. I think we mentioned this at the last meeting. We continue to advertise for plant operators. We've seen some of our staff step from non-operating roles internally into operating roles. So internal appointments have occurred in the last few months. We continue to, I guess, compete with mines and the like who can pay higher wages. So that is one of our competitors and one of the struggles that we face. Having said that, we have seen in the past some people who were wishing to get out of the mine and get more of a lifestyle choice. And we've been able to pick up some very good operators with very good skills and experience. So we continue to face some challenges in that space, but happy to take on some of your ideas.
I think it's community-based, not necessarily my ideas, but community-based. I think lifestyle is a big thing for many people nowadays, and the mining sector is traditionally rewarding financially, but has a lot of challenges within family and within lifestyle. And I think we've probably got lots to offer many in the community. So an interesting space that hopefully we can fill, and we'll see more of our new and modern equipment operating with the best of technology.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hopefully we will progress with the employment side of things. The other item in non-operating revenue and expenditure is our gravel from our pits. We've reduced our pit at Kewen hasn't had a great level of material, excuse me, been extracted from that to date. We're actually in the process of got a DA in at the moment to increase the extraction tonnage out of that facility. So we'll be looking at doing a lot of blasting and crushing of material, especially with a lot of our major road projects coming forward in the 23-24 year. So hopefully we'll be well in advance of where we are budgeted for the 23-24 year. Moving into our operating expenditure, here we were a little bit higher than budget by about 1.8 million. There's a number of contributing factors coming through, but there's one main one that pops out. But we'll just go through it as they come down. The admin and economic affairs costs are lower by about $600,000. As said previously, we've had that cost saving coming through in our admin in regards to minor position restructures and so forth and staff vacancies. So we'll be assessing that against the efficiency gain at year end. Our waste cost, as mentioned earlier, is higher by about 187,000. So as you can see, that the cost of our landfills have not gone up significantly the same as what the landfill revenue. So we've actually ended up a little bit in front there, which is quite pleasing. The Hunter Warbirds cost is higher by about $228,000. So the costs associated with the operations has been higher than anticipated. Our RMS State Roads individual price works orders are higher by about $1.3 million. So increases in these requests coming through. So there's a bit of a time lag between the revenue streams coming in and also the actual costs that have been expended. So in the May, June, we will expect to accrue a lot of revenue coming through to offset that 1.3 million. Overall road maintenance costs are higher by about nearly $800,000. Increased activity with maintenance following the flood event damages, and review of those costs are being finalised, and so that we can actually apply to the state government to get additional grant funding for the flood damage. So I would anticipate that we'll get plenty of funds to cover off that overspend that we've got there at the moment. And sewer operations and maintenance costs are higher by about 280,000. So it's we're just reviewing the costs in regards to relining activities to be adjusted. So it's more or less just a movement around. So obviously it's a very reactive part of the business. So it is a little bit overspent at this point in time. Capital works side of things is pretty well nearly spot on budget coming through, about 240,000 underspent at this point in time. The main items attached to this area of expenditure is our quarries investigation. As mentioned earlier, with our quarries, we've had higher than expected consultant costs for the DA to increase the extraction tonnage from the Kewen pit. So our revenues are down, but our expenses are in our capital area is a little bit higher. But we should see the benefit of that coming through once the DA has been approved and further extraction comes from the Kewen. The Emergency Operations Centre is lower by about $200,000. We're nearing the finalisation, and there's a possible deferral that will happen in June to the 23-24 year, with that project to be finalised by the 31st of July 2023. Cameron's Bridge approaches are higher by about 270. So we're reallocating those costs to the Rookel Road cutting works. So that'll come through in the mix. The Cameron's Bridge is now fully complete. The 14 bridge replacements are nearly spot on budget, about 100,000 underspent at the moment. That program is continuing relatively overall on schedule. The footpath, Merriwell footpath extension is lower by 350,000, as with the revenue streams. The works are behind. Deferrals proposed in this month for the 23-24 year. Regional road reseals are lower by about $300,000. The program has been finalised, just waiting on the final costs, and also there's a reallocation coming from the urban street area. We've done a bit of work on Sater Road, which went into the urban area, but it actually relates to Bunnan Road. So it'll be a regional road project coming through as it links out. Main Road 105, but the project up Gundy Road there, in regards to the Beltrees Hill, the works of it were extended and the ceiling is completed, and it was funded through the R2R. So with the additional R2R money, we completed a little bit more of our road restoration works. Urban reseals, as I mentioned, with the regional road reseals, it's higher than budget by 200,000. So that Seder road will be reallocated to the regional road area. And our final one on here is our sewer projects are lower by about $1.4 million. A lot of the works are reactive in regards to mains and other renewal works required to date. So we've proposed to do a fair few surrenders back into the sewer fund. So that'll sit off until such time as we need those funds to undertake further renewal works. So as you can see, it's a positive variance of $1.2 million. The budget position is pretty well stayed stagnant. So it stays at the $1,309. So to a balanced budget. Bank funds and investment report. At the moment, we've got $31.4 million held in funds. 30.38 million is held in our investments, which the schedule is attached for the committee's review. And our capital expenditure report at the end of May, effectively our revised capital works program went down to 23.56 million, reduced from $51.9 million. And there's expected to be some more minor deferrals to materialise in the June month, just to tidy off and put into the 23-24 year. So overall, based at the end of May, Council had spent 74.44 of its overall revised works budget. Coming through it and looking at the June period, we're pretty well getting close to our 90% of expenditure, if not higher than where we anticipated coming through. Just moving into our schedules. Here we've got on page 10 through to 13, you'll see that the fund there is pretty well, the request votes come back to nil on each of those funds, with overall zero move in requests. But in the function area, you'll see there's a multitude of votes coming through, which we've got enclosed in the report schedule of all those movements. So a lot of them relate to grant fundings that we received in advance, where we've put off into a restricted asset to be held until such time as those works are undertaken in the next financial year. Overall, it comes back to nil. So I'll give you a moment, if you haven't already reviewed, just to have a look at the budget variations. As you can see, majority of these budget variations are effectively being pushed off into restricted assets coming through the mix. And if there's no other questions, we'll just continue going through the reports. On page 16, we've got the bank rec there with our little worm graph that comes through. As you can see, we receive a fair bit of funds coming in, and then it drops away into May. That's obviously with a lot of our capital works expenditure being done from funds that we received previously from grant funding. So that just depicts coming through. You'll see that worm will go back the other way with the federal government providing the financial assistance grants in advance in June. So you'll see that turn and go back up again in the June month. Our investments held at the 31st of May, sitting at the 30.38 million. So we've almost got rid of all our lower end interest rates. So we're now kicking along at anywhere between 2.87 upwards coming through. So we've still got one at the NAB, which is 1.4, which is sitting over a longer period. But we should see improvement in our returns on our investments coming into the 23-24 year, which will be in excess of where we anticipated to come through. Moving into our capital expenditure area from page, just to give you a summary of from page 18 through to page 34. So included in here is just the summary of our capital works expenditure coming into the mix. As we've gone down through, any surrenders or votes have been itemised for this month coming into the mix. And it's got the original budget to the revised budget. So as you can see, that the revised budget is significantly lower than the original budget, and there's been a lot of communication out in the media in the last week or so in regards to a deferral of a lot of our projects. A lot of them are projects that have been deferred for many reasons, and they relate to the delay in obtaining grant funding, availability of contractors, the actual approval of our tenders coming through. So there's a number of reasons why the projects are deferred. The reason for the deferral doesn't mean that they're not going to be done. So the majority of our projects are grant funded projects, so which effectively are attached to federal and state government funding, which are held for that specific purpose. So we'll put those items, if anything's been deferred that we've received grant funding for, that goes off into restricted asset for an externally brought back in next year. And it's shown as an external restricted asset in council's financial statements that are audited each year.
I have a question on that, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Phelps. It certainly has been out there, and I'm still looking for the 27 million, but I can't find it. What happens to the funds deeded to the Upper Hunter Shire Council after a project is abandoned or deferred? That's one question. Can you identify where the money is held? Which I think you just answered, but I'll ask that so it's clear. And what guarantee does the community have in terms of the systems that are in place by the OLG, sorry, and the Auditor General and alike, and even the Treasury? What systems are in place that monies cannot be spent willy-nilly and at the whim of the council if a project is abandoned and the funds remain in Upper Hunter Shire Council restricted assets?
Mr. Chair, I might start the answer, and Mr. Phelps can fill in the financial details. I actually sign each and every funding deed that comes into council. So a funding deed that comes to council from the state government or the federal government is signed. That deed sets out specific criteria for what the funds can be spent on, and it sets out the criteria of what has to be completed by council for each of the funding milestones for payment. So we don't just get given a bucket load of cash and then determine the scope. The scope has to be agreed to as part of the funding deed. Now, the process is that we have this artificial financial year that we do our reporting period in, but projects don't always constrain themselves to this July to June period. So at the end of a financial period, if we haven't spent the money in accordance with the funding deed milestones, we have a process, an accounting process that wraps up everything at the end of the year and then starts the process again in the new financial year, so that we have a clear baseline and start point for each commencement of each financial year, and we can allocate the funds within that financial year. So, for example, your first question was about what happens if a project is abandoned. The funding deed sets out the process for a project that can't be completed. In most instances, the funds that have been spent on that project are retained by the council. So you do an acquittal around the actual costs, and they wrap up the funding to match that. But the remaining funds, if council is holding any remaining funds, gets returned back to the funding body, the state government or federal government, and the project is ceased. And that's an example that happened exactly with the Cassler sewage scheme. We went through a number of investigations. The investigations, the design costs were accounted for. The council said, we can't afford this. We may look for a future funding source down the track, but we can't build this project for $5 million with the remaining 2 that's in the funding deed. So that arrangement was ceased. We gave any additional funds back, and we didn't receive any new funding coming in. And if there's a new funding deed sought in the future, that will commence a new process. In regards to projects that are continuing on, council, as Mr. Phelps has just explained the process, council has a process where we have restricted assets. They are funds that are held in account. The funds are recognised in that account for the purpose of that project. They can't be used elsewhere, so we can't put them into reserves. There was some reporting earlier in this week that says once it's in a reserve, it can be spent on anything. That's not true. We are still bound by the funding agreement. Those funds are then withdrawn from that reserve back into the project and expended against the project in accordance with the original funding deed. I think I answered all the questions, but if I've missed anything.
Just to clarify, with the restrictions, there's external and internal restrictions. So the external restrictions is where the general manager has mentioned that all these grant fundings that we've received in advance actually sit, and they have to be matched against cash available. So those external restrictions are the ones that are bound by legislation that we have to hold off to the side. The internal restrictions that we have is only just through prudent cash management. So we might put money into a reserve that relates to painting of the building here, but it's councils and councillors have the ability to move that money to wherever, but that's excess to the external restriction, which is legislated. So that's the difference between internal and the external. The externals have to have cash availability. And the other point I'd just like to make is with a lot of the deferred projects that we have here, so saying that there's $27 million in deferred projects, we may only receive milestone funding for that at 30%. So when we've taken them back out, we've actually taken out revenue side of it, being grant funding that we anticipated to get during the year, but we haven't received as well. So there's only part of the 27 million which we would have received funds in advance to undertake the work. So that's the other factor.
And I'll just reiterate the third question there because it was quite long. I suppose, what's the auditing process? How is the state government guaranteeing, or the federal government for that matter, how are they guaranteeing that we're not playing slush fund poker with the 27 million?
Yep. So effectively, thanks, Councillor, for the question. The actual audit office of New South Wales undertake the audit, and they review council's restricted assets, and they look at it on the basis of legislation to say whether or not those restricted assets have to be external restricted assets and held in accordance with the cash availability of council as at the 30th of June each year.
So let me just see if I've got this correct. The funds come in on a deed, which the general manager signs after we've actually given you permission to sign it. Those funds are paid in milestones once the project has commenced, or as the deed kicks the milestones. There is no initial payment. We don't get the money straight up. We only get it as we do the job. We have no say over what the deed says, and we have no say over the way the deed is expended, because the legislation states that you must do this. But finally, and probably most importantly, we're not the ones that are actually checking if we're doing the right thing. There's an external legislated governance body in Sydney somewhere that's saying, righto, Upper Hunter, where's that money?
Sorry.
Yep, that is right, Councillor. The only part of that that's probably needs clarification is that with a lot of our milestone funding, when we actually sign a deed, the government will provide 30% and up to 80% of the funding upfront so that council has cash flow to actually undertake the works. So we may receive funding in advance. An example of that is Moonam Brook Road. So we received $3 million out of a $4.6 million package.
Yeah.
Upfront. To date, we've only spent about $1.8 million. So
But the audit office is actually making sure that we're spending that 80% on Moonam Brook Road and not on overseas trips and junkets and whatnot.
the overall, when we do the financial accounting behind it, we allocate the amount that relates to that funding deed against the monies received. So the $1.8 million, of which 1.5 of it may relate to that deed. The rest of the funds that haven't been expended from that first milestone payment get put into the external restricted assets, and that's what's checked by the audit office.
Yeah.
Can I just add something, Mr. Chair, just to put some context into that as well? There is a further step that happens at the beginning of that process, and that is in regard to setting the budget. Mr. Phelps has already alluded to the fact that some of the assumptions made back in as early as April for the period July to June, the next financial year, are which of these grant funds are going to come to council in that 12-month period. So we have a number of options. We can assume all the funding is going to come. We can assume some of the funding is going to come, or none of the funding is going to come, and we can adjust the budget depending on the assumptions that we made early and got wrong. We can adjust the budget further on. So we can either reduce the budget if we don't get the funding and we assumed it was coming, or we can come back to you and say we need to increase the budget because this funding has come in. Either way, we make an assumption, as I say, March or April, as we're preparing the budget, on which grant funding may come through in that 12-month period. Now, a perfect example is Main Road 358. We had the announcement, we've had 3 announcements on the funding coming through from the federal government, and none of the actual fund has actually been given to us yet. So we've made assumptions in the budget that certain funding would become due and we'd be able to commence, but we can't commence that project till the funding comes through. So in that instance, a deferral has occurred because the funding hasn't come through when we made our best estimates in regard to that. Another example around that is the federal funding that we got for the asphalt upgrade to the runway. We've been promised, and we already have the funding, we have the funding agreement to say the federal government will put in up to 50% of that project. But I can't spend 50% of a project until I get the remaining funding. So it's not logical to put 50% in because I can't do 50% of the job. So I've got funding ready to go as long as I can find matching funding from another source, which I don't yet have. So there's some uncertainty around whether that project will actually happen. Do I put the whole 5 million in, not having the other 50% funding, or do I put nothing in and do a further budget variation? So there will always be budget variations and deferrals depending on the assumptions that we make during that period. So that's the other complexity to the whole funding process. If we had certainty around that, a lot of this deferral wouldn't happen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I feel much better in knowing that the people's money is taken care of by not only this committee and the council itself, but also the audit office, our good friend Mr. Phelps, the general manager, and a lot of very, very smart people who know what they're doing around money.
No, thank you for your question, councillor. It's a really complex space, and it takes quite a lot of complexity through multi-layers of professionalism from our professionals through to state professionals through to independent contractors who work here in auditing to keep an eye on everything. And this is why this space is quite important. We vote on variances every month, and that's where our movements of cash flows are to be seen. A lot of this is the money that we do have. The deeds are what we don't have and are promised through Treasury, and we have to extract that from Treasury and keep timeliness on that, Mr. Phelps, don't we? And with that, I think we'll, I hope you know where you're up to. We'll move along.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair, for that. With regards to the capital works, we will provide a summary, given the vast amount of money that we did defer in the capital works program. We'll give a summary of what those works are, just a high level summary, and the funding that's attached to those deferrals. So you can see whether or not we include it in as an operational expenditure or whether or not it's coming from a restricted asset and whether it goes back into a restricted asset. So just to give some more clarity around those deferrals in the coming through. So that'll happen in the June meeting. Moving down into our high level surplus and deficiency reports, just for your review. It's pretty well just an itemized list of all our function areas coming through, and that comes through down to page 66. Any questions, Mr. Chair?
Probably just a cheeky one on indulgence. You've seen then the financial year, which we're 1 month behind on. How do the cards lay out? We progress well?
At the moment, Mr. Chair, we probably aren't to a position of where that is because we have to go through and actually do a lot of accruals for revenue coming in, especially with a lot of our capital works projects that we're receiving the final lot of our invoicing in at the moment. And we'll be bringing that through. But overall, I think it's pretty well within budget. I know the capital expenditure back to the revised budget is relatively consistent. So I think that it should be quite all right by the 30 June. So we can provide probably a quick overview to councillors before the next meeting, if you wish.
Yeah, that might sound good to involve everybody through the councillor space. That'd be great. And with that, have we got any more comment, question from councillors, staff? No, you're happy, Councillor Burns. Do we have a mover then for the? I'll move that. You'll move that. Councillor Burns moved, and Councillor McKenzie, thank you for a second, and all those in favour. Unanimous there. Thank you, councillors. We'll move on to the property update, please. We could have discussion on that, please.
Yeah, councillors, I can probably give you a bit of a quick overview. In fact, probably the easiest way to do this is just to turn your mind to the table, which is the summary table that commences on page 68 of the document. I can walk you through that, or you can ask questions as you see fit. 98 Hill Street, we're in the process of submitting a planning proposal for that to change the categorisation for that land. That may take another month or two to get through our DA process, and there's some community consultation that has to occur with that as well, because it does change it from community land to operational land. So we need to go through that proper process. 49 Stafford Street doesn't have a lot of I guess interest from anyone other than the adjoining neighbour. So that's the one that we'll be having direct conversations with. That's still progressing. 97 Hill Street is similar to 98 Hill Street and has to go through a planning proposal process. So they're being done in parallel. Aberdeen Heights subdivision, we called EOYs. We didn't have any submissions, but since then we've been talking to a consultant that's been working for us. Wayne and I have had a couple of conversations. We're going to go back to market, but selectively target some developers who have shown interest but didn't put interest in the official EOI process. So we'll continue to have those discussions. As you know, there's 27 lots there. It is quite a profitable subdivision for us to partner with a developer, and we do believe there is a developer that would be interested in it. So we will continue to have that conversation and find a partner. Sorry, Mr. Chair, did you have a question?
No, just a comment. That be really exciting to get that on the move. I know there's a lot of talk within Aberdeen about that particular development, and I'd love to see it go ahead. So thanks for all your efforts discussing forward, and hopefully we get a little bit of a move on there. That'd be wonderful.
Yep. EOIs have been done for most of these. We're just, as I say, we're just feeding them out to the market slowly. We didn't want to flood the market, and we wanted to test through some of the early ones too. What was the type of response we're getting? Do we need to change anything in our approach? So it is a bit of a learning practice as we do that. Merriwell subdivision, again, similar thing. EOI has been prepared. It's probably not as urgent as some of the other ones, so we'll continue to work with that one. 7 Sermon Street, EOI did go out. It has closed. We didn't get any official submissions, but we had some inquiries, and some of those inquiries probably weren't the direction we wanted to go. They were more just in regard to low density housing or refurbishing the existing residents. And as you know, the strategy that council signed off on is a medium to higher density type arrangement there to maximise the return and provide a greater housing outcome for our community. So we've got some contacts that didn't make a formal submission, but we'll continue to chase those contacts up on that one. Bunnan Road, Scone is awaiting the removal of the non-directional beacon towers, the NDB towers. The initial community consultation we undertook out there was a little bit divided. We had some support for the removal and some objection. CASA has now commenced the process of doing their own community consultation. The indication we're getting is that the NDB towers are redundant because the Scone Memorial Airport is serviced from a number of other towers as far as Tamworth, Armidale and West Gunnedah and the like. So they aren't necessary. We've also been told that they are the oldest towers in the fleet. So they're nearing 60 years. And I got the impression that there wasn't a lot of formal objection at CASA level, but we still have to go through community consultation. And during that process, there may be things that we need to consider through that process. So that will continue. Once that's done, the development on both lots 44 and lot 42 can be considered further. And a lot of that is progressing in anticipation of those towers being done. So we're sort of doing what preliminary work we can in readiness for that. The next few things are some older ones around the strategy in general, which, as you know, has been completed, and we're now pursuing that. Campbell's Corner, the next main part for Campbell's Corner is the library development. So that's about to be, just going to need to check with Matt. I've got the impression that he's pretty close to getting the DA out on that one. So maybe in the next month, I can give you an update on the library DA. There's a few matters there for Campbell's Corner, but they all pretty much relate back to the development both up and downstairs. Still not getting much interest in the upstairs space at Campbell's Corner, which is disappointing. Probably until we now see the main street reopened, we probably won't get a lot of interest in new development occurring in the main street. They'll probably wait and see what happens there. We've had the odd inquiry, but not a real lot coming through. And as I mentioned when I talked about lot 44 at Bunnan Road, lot 42, we're about to go out with the EOI for that. That's the 6 hectare space on the western end, which could potentially be an air park that we spoke about at the airport community meeting some months ago. The other exciting thing happening in the property space is we've been looking at some of the sponsorship for our land that has high user interaction, so White Park and other sporting facilities. White Park in particular, we've been successful in getting 9, I think it is as of this morning, sponsorship agreements for signage down there. So that's bringing in a revenue stream that hasn't previously been available to council, and gives locals predominantly an opportunity to advertise their businesses at some large events. And as you know, White Park can get quite a lot of I guess exposure when we have a lot of people coming into those events. So some exciting things happening in that space too. Any questions?
No, I did see my, thank you staff for my little pet. So my pet's in there, the top of Campbell's Corner, and the residential side of that is very complex because of the fire rating. The short term and upstairs shop development, not so much. And could be probably suggested that maybe that would be a more interesting line of thinking, especially tying in with some of the major employers, the studs of the region, and some high value short-term accommodation for some of their clients and staff alike. But apart from that, I do just have a little comment there, just on a number, just on the front page, there's a table there, the least total. You probably need to just change that. And outside of that, we've got any more comments or questions from councillors? All being equal, do I have a mover? Councillor Burns, a seconder. Councillor McKenzie, all those in favour? All three of us. Righto, we'll move on to the last point of call for the day, is response to previous questions. And that's only for notation only. So if we could please note that. I don't believe we need to put a vote on that, do we? Move on that. Seconded, McKenzie, Councillor McKenzie. All those.
Just through the chair.
Yes.
Probably just want to reiterate the final question taken on notice from Councillor Flaherty at the last meeting.
Yep, sure.
Since that, we just provide an update there that we provided the breakdown under separate cover coming through. So we sent out an email this morning in regards to those numbers coming into the Hunter Wahlberg's Cafe, revenue and expenses. Overall, as you'll see in the email that has been sent out, and we've probably put some commentary back into the minutes into the mix. I've done a bit of a high level review overall of the actual cafe for each quarter coming through, and included in that our revenue streams are about $102,000 for the year. But our expenditure is sitting at about 155 for the year. We've seen some significant increases in our revenue streams. So obviously with the change from a weekend operation in September quarter through to June, that has increased the revenue streams with the opening hours. And also the popularity of the facility has increased. So as we can see probably over the last 6 months, the revenue coming in has been a bit more consistent coming through. The other downside to that is that our costs have also gone up. So we've had increase in our wages costs, and also just our operational costs, more or less kitting out the actual cafe with additional consumable costs. So a lot of our aprons and little utensils and so forth, to make it more efficient so that we can actually save some time going forward in regards to producing a lot of our the supply of goods through the cafe. So overall, you'll see in the actual summary that the net position's gone from about a break-even point in September. We lost about 26,000 in the June quarter.
Could you maybe speak to a little bit there, Wayne? I know those staff members do quite a lot in that facility, and there's a lot around VIC, and there's a lot around events, and there's also a lot around the airport museum itself. Would these numbers be totally reflective of just the cafe itself?
Yeah, so through the chair, I've gone through and done a detailed review of those costs and only isolated out the cafe staff that are there. There'll be further review of those costings to make sure that they were specifically for the cafe.
Yep.
Because effectively all our casual staff are in one pool.
Sure.
Within the ledger. So we'll be going through and ensure the completeness of the revenue data as well as the expenditure is and the trends throughout the year have been captured. And also then we're monitoring it going forward. So obviously with the operations, to make the facility get up and going, we've probably maybe overstaffed initially in the first 6 months.
Yep.
Just so that we don't lose the reputational
Oh, absolutely.
aspect of the actual facility.
Yeah.
So now it's a point in time that, and I know that the coordinator out there that is looking after the facility, that she's actually going through reviewing the staffing levels, reviewing the costs of obtaining supplies, and more or less looking now at getting a lot of supplies through wholesalers at a better rate, and looking at our hours, our opening hours. So now we've had that 6 months or 9 months worth of 7 days a week.
Yep.
We can probably get a trend of when people are coming in and when people aren't coming in.
Yeah.
So we can reduce hours around the peak times and so forth. So we'll end up getting more efficiencies coming through. And obviously that's a position that we'll be doing as a management team is looking at that over the course of the next 12 months and making sure that we're coming back into parity with the actual revenue streams.
And how are we managing that data, Director?
We're effectively going through and bringing it into our ledger system. We've got it isolated now in the general ledger for next year, for the 23-24 year, the cafe revenue and cafe expenses. As it was before, it was included in the Hunter Warbirds Aviation Centre. So,
but more so our, you were saying about the modifying our hours as per traffic. What systems have we got to monitor traffic, and how do we use that going forward for best case results? And also because that space is now the VIC, which is very important for the community. I think we can probably have further discussion in the future about VIC's online space. There's been a fair bit of negative space in the Scone area about tourism. And I think we maybe need to have a bigger discussion about appropriate web pages to put our tourist information for Upper Hunter, but also for individual towns for Merriwa. They're very different spaces, and we've put it under this Upper Hunter banner. But I think we need a bigger discussion, and Councillor Mackenzie, you've been in this space. People look for very different experiences out of our great towns, Aberdeen, Merriwa, Murrundi and Scone. And I think that online space is going to be really important going forward. And perhaps like the town names on URLs will be really important going forward. And I think that's something we probably need to keep an eye on, as to the nature of the information going out there on our wonderful communities.
I'll respond, and if Councillor Mackenzie wants to add anything, she can ask a question after I respond. Your questions are mainly around the digital reach and our digital, I guess, transition from at a tourism and event space. We have typically worked closely with Muswellbrook Shire Council through Upper Hunter Country Tourism and that space. The Mayor and I and their Mayor and their General Manager met last week and had a discussion around what does that look like going forward, because we had similar, I guess, similar concerns about what does the future look like, and do we keep doing the things in the past, or do we change our direction? In parallel to that discussion, councils be aware we've got grant funding for a regional branding project. and I need to keep reiterating, that's not about a council brand or a council logo. That's about how do we promote the region? And it's exactly the issues that you just raised. How do you promote the region, but still capture the individual essence of each of those small spaces? And how do you do it in one project? Because I don't want to have a regional project that overshadows the smaller smaller townships and their uniqueness. It has to be part of a considered strategy that delivers the whole lot in one. I believe it can be done. And tenders or expressions of interest closed for that last Friday. Our staff have started considering those expression of interest, and we've got some really top tier submissions. Some of the work that we're doing in that space will be presented to councillors at a workshop, which will actually be out at the Hunter Warbirds in August. Now, I don't know if councillors have received the invite yet, but if you have, great. I'm glad you've got it. That'll be a combined workshop with us and Muswellbrook Council. I can't tell you when the last time you had a combined workshop with another council, but I think it's an exciting thing to be able to get two councils together and consider an issue that's regionally significant and try not doing this on our own, but working collaboratively with another council. Now, there may be things that the two different councils want to focus on, but I still believe overall we can drive a regional program that we will get synergies from that individually we couldn't have achieved, but together we can. So that's the strategy there. I know I've probably rambled a bit and haven't given you the answer you want yet because I don't have the full answer yet, but we are close to being able to present a lot more to councillors.
Look, I think that's going to be wonderfully progressive for all of our individual spaces, and to incorporate to work with Muswellbrook Council will be really terrific. Their space over at Denman, and they have similar synergies with our communities. So that's going to be fantastic. But yeah, it's just fantastic that we'll be moving forward, and that digital space is what's going to be going ahead, and getting some positive information on each individual town within that space, and even looking at our URLs and where our information flows go, and really working through as a team to bring tourists into this community throughout the Upper Hunter would be great. Sorry if I've waffled on a little bit there, just to finish up. Has anybody else got any questions, comments, discussion? Thank you.
I just have one. I think I think everyone is aware of it in relation to which way council goes to the hours of a visitor centre. We are restricted currently with the yellow eye. So if you become part of that, you need to be within certain requirements. But I guess if you decide to leave that, that's another decision. So.
Yeah, that's really important, and thank you for your input. It's important that we've had people out in the field that are here making decisions that do know the systems, and no, thank you, councillor. And with that, we might look at my new digital clock here, which is taking a bit of getting used to, but we might close the meeting today at 9:58. Thank you, councillors, and thank you, staff, for your participation today.
Yeah.